So I'm going to start like we always do by just taking a minute to get grounded. And I would invite you to do the same thing. So that would just involve putting your feet on the ground, closing down your eyes if you're comfortable, taking a few deep breaths from your nose, really bringing your attention into the current moment. Letting go of the thoughts of the day. Just try to become really present. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. So I'm going to start just with a few of our regular kind of etiquette for those of you who might be new. I ask that you be really mindful of your speech. So please be careful not to speak in absolutes. And by that, I mean, we don't say, I hate fours, I hate eights, I love threes. We don't talk that way. You can talk about behavior and you can talk about levels of behavior. I really appreciate highly evolved fours. I am really challenged by unaware type eights. That's fine. But please be careful not to categorize people. It's just inappropriate. I don't want that. Projecting. So it can be really tempting to try, especially during the Q&A, to have somebody who is the type interpret what's going on in the mind of someone in your life. But the panelists cannot tell you what your ex-wife was thinking or what your mother-in-law is thinking or what your brother is thinking. They can talk about their experience as the type, and maybe that's helpful, that's the goal, but they can't interpret what's happening for someone else. So please just keep that in mind. And then finally, just to say, to be an Enneagram type, you are most of the things most of the time. So even those of you who are not type 4s are going to listen to me talk about the theory, and you're probably going to think, I am some of those things that she just described. That's fine. That doesn't actually make you the type. That just makes you a human being. You might be the type if you start to feel like I'm most of these things most of the time. So just keep that in mind. So we're talking about type 4, and type 4 is described as the individualist or the artist. And I want to be careful with artist. It doesn't mean that they necessarily are in the creative field. It just means that this is one of the words that we use to describe them. I describe these are the people who own the emotional spectrum. So they've been up, they've been down, they've been every place in between, and they often are on a pretty regular basis. So this is someone who's having a lot of emotional intensity. They get a nice phone call from a good friend. They're feeling on top of the world. It's the best day ever. They spill coffee. They destroy their outfit. Now it's very devastating. And the events of the day can feel pretty intense. While they're up and down a lot, they spend more time in the darker emotions. So sadness, despair, melancholy, those are usually emotions that they're quite familiar with. And a lot of 4s will say, I like the intensity of my personality. I actually like that. I don't want a flat day. And if I have to take a deep depression, if my choice is to have a really dark day or have a really average flat day, I might choose dark because that makes me feel alive. Like I like that vivid, intense experience. So that can be something that's happening for them. I say that we have all gone to our type 4 friends when we are having an emotional problem because they are gifted at holding the space for all sorts of emotions and helping us process our difficult situations. So they are emotionally fearless. Whatever yucky problem you have that you think no one else has experienced, they are going to be fine with it. They can hold the space for you. They can help you understand what you're feeling. They can parse out the emotion. They have very, very high emotional fluency, and they can really bring that to the rest of us. This is one of their gifts. The habit of attention, their attention goes to what's missing. So they spend a lot of time kind of observing, feeling a sense of melancholy and longing and feeling like the rest of the world seems happy. They seem to have this thing that I'm missing. What is it that I'm missing? Why can't I have that level of satisfaction? So questions of identity can come up a lot, and there's a real desire for authenticity. So 4s will say, I really feel misunderstood most of the time, and that's so frustrating. When I finally connect with someone or something where I feel seen, or I feel understood, that's really healing. That's like the juice of life for me. So these are people who are really on a quest to figure out who they are, authentically be that, and have other people see that. They feel really good when they feel seen, and it's really painful when they feel misunderstood. So that's kind of part of what's going on as well. So the gifts of the type, kind of like I touched on already, these are original thinkers. These are people who come up with brand new ideas. Those boxes that apply to the rest of, the world don't apply to fours. They don't care. They are very comfortable operating outside of the norm, as long as it feels authentic. So they can come up with some really original ideas that can be shared with the rest of us. Emotional healing is another thing that they can bring. So this is somebody who, again, they've felt a lot, they've processed a lot, they've worked on a lot. So they really can bring this space for other people to hold, they can hold the space for other people to process their own emotions. So that's another thing that's going on, another gift of the type. The growth path. So we all start off with our habit of attention, which means we're focused a little bit too much in one direction, which leads us a little bit too far away from the other side. So what's the growth path for the type 4? They are moving from emotional reactivity to compassionate neutrality or equanimity. So the idea is it's great that they're feeling all of this intensity, but it can be really easy to buy into the story a little bit too much and to feel defined by their emotions. Highly evolved fours will say, I still feel everything, but I now understand that it's an emotion. It's going to pass. I don't need to make all my decisions immediately based on my emotional state in the moment. I can sit with that. I can own that. I can hold that space, but I don't need to act it out as much. So when they come into balance, it's where they're still feeling their emotions, but they're not buying into the story quite as much. They're more balanced. So that's kind of the high level overview. I talk about the different facets of the Enneagram. So facet number 2 is how I describe it, or level 2, the center. Which of the centers is the type 4 in? So type 4s are in the heart center, and this means that they first experience the world through the energy of emotion. So when something happens, they feel it first emotionally, and then they're having a mental experience and a physical somatic experience afterwards. Because they are a heart-centered type, it means the sensitive issue that 4s are dealing with is shame. And shame is where there's usually something in your personality that you have a really hard time accepting, something that you just don't like about yourself that's hard for you to just sit with and own and accept. And in the heart center, 4s are the ones that overexpress this. So they really can kind of identify with that piece of themselves that they're not super comfortable with. And shame is the thing that they're trying to dissolve. And this, again, is part of their growth path. So level 3, or facet number 3, the wings. So you are your type, but you're influenced by one of the numbers next to you. So a 4 with a 3 wing is called the aristocrat. And this is someone who's a little bit practical, can be a little bit image conscious, tends to be pretty successful in the material world because their focus can be there. This is someone who might like a little bit of glamour. They're just a little bit more aware of how they're being perceived. Authenticity is still going to win out. This is someone who is very dedicated to authenticity, but they might have just a taste of glamour. They might be a little flamboyant. They're going to be a little bit more, their image is probably going to be a little bit more central in who they are and who they're presenting. The 4 with the 5 wing is called the bohemian. So this is someone who can be a little bit more isolated, a little bit more intellectually focused, maybe a little bit more idiosyncratic, someone who really isn't so interested in image and is more kind of following their thoughts and maybe their belief system, and can just look a little bit more hermit-like, a little bit more isolated. So that's the 4 with the 5 wing. Just to kind of talk about the system, most of the theory is that you start off in life with one dominant wing, and in the second half of your life, you start to step into the other wing. So all 4s are going to have access to both wings. It's more a question of which one is more dominant for you at this period in your life. So keep that in mind. So we've talked about the overview, we've talked about the center, we've talked about the wings. Now we're going to talk about the subtype. And the subtype in the type 4 is really important. So subtype in general is important. And the idea is there are 3 subtypes that apply to all 9 of the Enneagram types. We have 27 variations. In some of the types, we'll see in type 5, the subtype doesn't change the behavior that much. All the 5s are going to look kind of similar. In type 4, this is not the case. It is the opposite. In type 4, the subtype matters quite a bit. And you could have 3 4s sitting right next to each other where it's hard for us, the outsiders, to understand those are all 4s. The behavior can look quite different. So I'll start with the self-preservation 4. The self-preservation 4, the word they use is tenacity, and this is called the sunny 4. So this is a 4 that can be hard to type as a 4 because they present either sunny and happy or stoic. This is not someone who's presenting the full emotional spectrum, and it's someone who is going to be, if they're feeling shame, if they're conscious of feeling shame, they're going to hold that a lot closer inside. The rest of us may not see that as much. This is somebody who almost has sort of a subconscious idea that satisfaction is out there. I don't have it yet. That's what I'm trying to get to. If I suffer enough, that's going to solve the problem. And through my suffering, I'm eventually going to reach satisfaction. So it's almost this idea that if I work harder, if I put myself in a really difficult environment, if I push myself, that's how I'm going to figure it out. There's a theory that Julia Butterfly, the woman who sat in the tree for several years, she might have been, or she might be a self-preservation 4. And it's this idea, I'm going to make life really hard, but in that's where I'm going to solve it. That's where I'm going to really figure out who I am and be able to express myself. So that can be the sunny 4, the self-preservation 4. The social 4, the word they use is shame. And this is the sad 4. So this is a 4 that actually feels shame a lot more directly. So this is someone who talks about it, who can feel it, who can kind of suffer overtly, like may talk about how they're very, disgusted with themselves, or they feel like they haven't performed to their highest and best. This is someone who can just talk about suffering and sadness. This is somebody who can have envy. So all of the 4s have envy, and the envy is usually about comparing themselves to others, with other people always ending up on top. This is the 4 that's going to feel that a little bit more directly. So this is someone who, it's not that they want bad for other people, that's not what's going on, but they'll look at everyone else seems to be, successful, and I went to that same school, but I'm not successful, I'm a failure. They really will do this comparison, always finding themselves at the bottom, even if to the outside world, maybe the outside world would say something else. They would say, actually, no, you are successful. This 4 in particular isn't necessarily going to see that. So, and this is a 4 that can be sometimes frustrating for their friends and family, because someone who can be really, really accomplished, but they don't recognize that in themselves. And so for them, they feel like, whatever I did, if I did it, probably anybody could do it. There's always someone who's better than me, and that's where I should be. So there can be some of that going on. So this is the sad 4, the social 4 with the word shame. And the final 4, the sexual or intimate subtype, the word they use is competition. And this is considered the mad 4. This is described as the angriest type on the Enneagram, someone who really can access anger. And the idea here is, if I'm going to suffer, so are you. So this is someone who's got a lot of intensity and can access anger and can direct anger. There's a theory that Steve Jobs was probably an intimate 4. And if you talk to the people who worked with him, they would say he could be the kindest, most sensitive person 1 hour, and an hour later be a complete asshole. And it's because you can access both. They've got full access to the emotional spectrum. They're feeling it a lot, and they're expressing it a lot. This is someone competition. They're very focused on wanting to be the best. They can almost seem 3-ish, but if you peel back what's going on, there's a lot of uncertainty. They think that they're okay, but then they question it. There can be a lot of self-doubt, but then a lot of righteousness. It can be a lot of back and forth. It's a colorful person. If you meet an intimate type 4, you'll remember, like, there's just a lot of intensity there. So those are the 3 subtypes. Keep in mind, as I've described before, you can think of the subtype as a pie of 100%. So it's not that you're all one or all the other. You're probably going to find yourself in a little bit of all 3 of the subtypes. There's usually one that will feel like it's 50% or more. And it's called a stacking, kind of how you feel. So you might feel like you're quite dominant in 2 and you have a blind spot in the 3rd. You might feel like you're fairly evenly stacked, but 1 is always going to be slightly dominant, and that's the subtype that you lead with. So keep that in mind. So that's facet number 4. Facet number 5 is what used to be called the stress point and security point, path of disintegration and path of integration. Now we refer to it as the contraction point and the expansion point. So this is the idea that we all behave differently when we're under stress and when we're feeling relaxed and expansive. In type 4, if they're feeling stressed, if they're feeling contracted, things are not going well, they're really stressed out, they go to type 2. So suddenly, this is someone who 4s often will kind of withdraw, but if they're feeling really stressed out, they might get clingy. So suddenly they're clinging to the intimate people around them. They can get overly involved in other people's lives. They can start to have boundary issues. Like it can get just a little bit messy. And this is them going to stress. In the expansion point, when they're feeling more relaxed, things are going well, they go to type 1. So type 1 is the perfectionist, and the behavior here is 4s who are usually kind of following their emotions as their guide, suddenly become more organized, suddenly become more consistent. So this is someone who maybe starts to have routine, who really starts to show up in a very regular, consistent way. And this is when 4s are doing well. They go to type 1. So that's what that can look like. And then the final facet that I want to talk about, facet 6 is what I call it, or level 6, is this idea of how aware are you? So there's 9 different levels of awareness within the Enneagram. And what I say is, if we were all operating at our highest level, it would be very hard for any of us to recognize what type the others are. And it would be a world of tremendous compassion. So all of the types, when they have really relaxed their habit of attention, when they become really self-aware, they are deeply compassionate and they are not acting out their habit of attention. So they're still thinking whatever their habit of attention is, but you're not going to see it played out nearly as much. So what would you say about a highly self-aware type 4? Compassionate neutrality is the goal. This is someone who's original, who is expressive, who is authentic, who is healing, who is inspiring. This is someone who's probably worked through their pain. They can heal others. They can inspire others. They create space for other people to follow their trail, to heal themselves. This is someone who can be just deeply, deeply expressive and deeply, deeply healing. So that is what a highly self-aware type 4 would look like. As the defenses start to tighten, if they are less self-aware, they are acting out their habit of attention more, what is that going to look like? Someone who's sensitive, someone who is emotionally intense, someone who's starting to kind of experience and behave with their ever-shifting moods. There's a lot of moodiness. There can be a situation where the fantasy world and the actual world, it's hard to reconcile the two. There's a rich fantasy world going on that never feels like the material world can keep up. So there's a kind of desire to just stay disengaged and in the fantasy world. So that can be a struggle that they have. Routine is hard. This is someone who takes things personally, feels really wounded really easily. And this is someone who can get pretty self-absorbed. So these are a very emotional type, but they spend a lot of that emotional sensitivity focused on their own emotions. And again, feeling very vulnerable, very raw. So that can be what's happening as the defenses are tightening, kind of in that middle level of awareness. And then finally, low levels of awareness, just someone who's really fixated on their habit of attention, really acting it out. So someone who's angry at themselves and angry at other people, they feel like a failure. They're angry about the circumstances that made them feel like a failure. So there can be a lot of shame, a lot of anger. This is someone who's drained of energy. They're tired a lot. It's hard for them to function. They feel alienated. They feel isolated. They feel misunderstood. This is someone who can really fall into kind of the depths of depression. And this is someone who can feel like there's just no purpose in life. They can have almost suicidal is kind of as far as they can get. So it can be a lot of just heavy, drained energy, a lot of darker feelings. So that can be what's happening there. And again, just to kind of keep in mind, the goal is these high levels of self-awareness where compassionate neutrality is what we're seeing, somebody who's healing and inspiring. Like that's what this can also look like. So just to kind of close that way.